Genghis Khan, the apocalypse of the steppe. He was not born to rule, he was born to survive a world that drank the blood of the weak. In 1162 AD, amidst the soul-crushing frost of the Mongolian steppe, a child was ripped into a reality that offered no mercy, only the blade. His name was Temujin. As he entered the world, his tiny bruised fist was clenched around a cold blood clot, a celestial omen that the heavens had not sent a king, but a butcher of empires. No throne awaited him, no silk, no servants, only the howling of wolves, the biting hunger of the void, and a sky so vast it made men feel like insects. This is the story of how an outcast redefined the meaning of terror and built a world on a foundation of bone. His father, Yesuge, a minor chieftain, was poisoned like a dog by his rivals. The betrayal was swift. The consequences were cataclysmic. Sensing the scent of death, his own tribe abandoned Temujin's family to the elements. In the brutal logic of the steppe, the weak were a weight that had to be cut. They were left to starve in the barren wilderness. Temujin, a mere child, watched as the people he called kin turned their backs. He, his mother Holin, and his siblings became ghosts in the tall grass. They ate roots, hunted rats, and endured winters that could shatter granite. It was here, in the freezing darkness, that Temujin learned the ultimate law of existence. Power is the only god, and loyalty is a myth until it is forged in fire. Betrayal was his constant shadow. When his half-brother Bektar challenged his meager authority, Temujin did not plead for peace. He did not negotiate. He executed him with the cold precision of a professional. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a necessary pruning of the weak. Survival demanded total control. Later, captured by enemies and forced into a heavy wooden collar like a beast, he was paraded for mockery. They thought they had broken him. They were wrong. He wasn't crying. He was calculating. He was memorizing every face, every guard rotation, every weakness in their souls. When he escaped, he didn't just run. He evolved. He realized that bloodlines meant nothing. The old world was built on the lies of noble birth, but Temujin would build a new one on the truth of absolute merit. He began gathering the broken. He didn't want the sons of generals. He wanted the outcasts, the survivors, the men who had tasted the same dirt he had. He promised them one thing. If they gave him their souls, he would give them the world. He rewarded loyalty with everything he had and punished betrayal with horrors that made the stars weep. By 1206 AD, the impossible had occurred. On the banks of the Onan River, the fractured warring tribes of the steppe, men who had killed each other for centuries, bowed before him. They proclaimed him Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, the Khan of Khans. It wasn't a coronation, it was a declaration of war against the planet. He turned the Mongol people into a singular, unstoppable machine of death. He abolished the class system. In his army, a common shepherd could command 10,000 men if he was brave enough, while a noble's son would rot in the mud if he showed fear. Discipline was absolute. If one man fled, his entire unit was executed. If a unit failed, the division was decimated. This wasn't an army. It was an avalanche of iron and horseflesh. Every man was a soldier, every horse was a weapon, and every order was the word of God. Then, Genghis Khan looked beyond the horizon. He saw the great empires of China and Khwarazm, civilizations that hid behind massive stone walls and laughed at the barbarians. Their laughter would soon turn into a death rattle. Genghis Khan didn't just fight, he innovated. He turned their own engineers against them, building siege engines that rained fire and plague. When the Shah of Khwarazm dared to kill his ambassadors, the Khan unleashed a hurricane of vengeance. Cities that had stood for millennia, Bukhara, Samarkand, Nishapur, were systematically dismantled. He didn't just kill the people, he killed the memory of the cities. He diverted rivers to wash away their ruins. He was the scourge of God, a divine plague sent to remind humanity that walls are just tombs waiting to be closed. Yet, in the wake of the slaughter, he brought a terrifying order. He created the Yam, a postal system so fast it felt like sorcery. He established the Yasa, a code of law so strict that it was said a woman could carry a mountain of gold from the Pacific to the Mediterranean without being bothered by a single soul. He opened the Silk Road, connecting the ends of the earth through a path paved with the skulls of his enemies. He allowed all religions to exist, not out of kindness, but because he knew that the only God that mattered was the one that gave him victory. When he died in 1227, Genghis Khan left behind the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. He was buried in a secret tomb, and every witness to his burial was slaughtered so that his rest would never be disturbed. He remains the ultimate architect of the modern world, a man who burned down the old, stagnant empires to make room for a globalized future. He was the storm that never ended. He was Temujin, the boy who became the apocalypse. He proved that no wall is high enough, no ocean wide enough, and no army strong enough to stop a man who has nothing left to lose, and the will to take the world beyond the steppe did not see him coming. It never does. They sat in their palaces, blinded by their own shadows, unaware that the horizon was about to catch fire. China stood first, not as a target, as a lesson. To the south, the Jin dynasty ruled fortified cities, stone walls, and millions of people who believed cavalry meant nothing against civilization. They were wrong. They believed that bricks and mortar could stop the wind. Genghis Khan did not attack walls. He attacked certainty. He struck at the very soul of their stability. He learned fast. He was a master of adaptation. Engineers were spared from the slaughter. Artisans were protected. Anyone who could break stone, bend metal, or invent a new way to kill lived. Everyone else was expendable, mere fuel for the furnace of his ambition. Cities that opened their gates were stripped, bled dry, and spared only to serve as shadows of their former selves. Cities that resisted were erased, not conquered, erased. Their names were struck from the earth. The Mongols moved faster than news. They were a nightmare that arrived before the dream ended. Before a city heard of the first massacre, the second was already burning. Before armies mobilized, their supply lines were gone, cut by ghosts on horseback. Before walls mattered, fear arrived. A paralyzing, bone-chilling dread that turned brave men into cowards. Entire regions surrendered without a single arrow fired. Those who hesitated vanished from history, their legacies ground into the dust. Northern China collapsed city by city. Refugees fled south carrying horror instead of hope, their eyes wide with the reflection of burning homes. Their stories did more damage than Mongol arrows. They were the infection of terror. Genghis Khan watched carefully. Terror was a weapon, and it worked best when controlled with surgical, cold-blooded precision. Then came the mistake. 1218 AD, the Khwarazmian Empire, a Muslim superpower stretching across Central Asia, rich, confident, arrogant. They looked at the steppe and saw savages. They were wrong. Genghis Khan did not want war. He sent traders. He sent diplomats. He offered the hand of peace and the wealth of trade. They were murdered, publicly. Their goods stolen. Their heads returned as a bloody, severed insult. That single act sealed an empire's fate. It was the loudest death sentence in history. Genghis Khan did not respond with anger. He responded with extinction. He divided his army into lethal columns that moved hundreds of miles apart, synchronized like the gears of a death machine. They appeared where no army should exist. Deserts were crossed like paved roads. Mountains were ignored as if they were flat plains. Rivers became roads for his horses. The Khwarazmian Shah panicked. His confidence shattered like glass. His armies scattered into the wind. His cities stood alone, isolated towers in a sea of blood. They died alone. Otrar fell first. Its governor, the man who started the fire, was executed slowly. Molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears, a message of wealth turned into agony, not mere revenge. Bukhara followed. Genghis Khan entered the city himself, riding his horse into the sacred halls. He stood inside the mosque and spoke words that chilled the blood of every listener. I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me. Then the city burned, a funeral pyre for an entire civilization. Samarkand resisted. Its walls were strong, its defenders confident in their steel. The Mongols breached them in days, turning strength into a joke. Soldiers were executed, civilians enslaved, skilled workers deported to serve the Khan, the rest slaughtered. The streets filled with bodies, so many that movement became difficult. The ground became a marsh of human remains. The Shah fled, east, west, north, always ahead of death, but always behind fear. Genghis Khan hunted him across continents, relentless, personal, and absolute. The Shah died alone on a desolate island, starving, abandoned, wrapped in rags. His empire was dead before his body was cold. But the slaughter did not stop, because resistance still existed, and Genghis Khan did not tolerate echoes. Persia collapsed. Cities burned so completely that grass would not grow for years. The earth itself was traumatized. Libraries vanished into ash. Cultures that took centuries to build ended in a single season. Baghdad trembled. The Islamic world broke. The Mongols did not rule through occupation. They ruled through memory. Everyone knew what resistance meant. It meant the end of all things. Then came the West. Russia was not ready. Its princes were divided by petty greeds. Its armies were slow and heavy. 1223 AD, the Battle of the Khalkha River. The Mongols used their oldest trick. They pretended to flee. The Russians pursued for days, blinded by the hope of victory. Then the trap closed like a steel jaw. The Mongols turned. Encirclement was total. The Russian army collapsed into a massacre. Captured princes were executed beneath wooden platforms. Mongol generals feasted and drank above them while they suffocated in the dirt. Power was demonstrated, not negotiated. Europe heard rumors of the Tartars. They dismissed them. They laughed in their cathedrals. They would learn later when the smoke reached their skies. By now, Genghis Khan ruled an empire larger than any before it, from China to the Caspian Sea, built not on borders, but on absolute crushing obedience. Law replaced tribe. Merit replaced blood. Fear replaced loyalty. Even his sons feared him, for he was more than a father. He was the law. He did not trust permanence, only movement, only pressure, only the hunt. In 1227 AD, during a campaign against the Tanguts, the great Khan fell ill. Some say from injury, some from sickness, some from assassination. No one knows, because no one was allowed to ask. His death was hidden behind a wall of silence. The campaign continued. Cities fell unaware their destroyer was already a ghost. When his body was carried home, guards killed anyone who saw the procession. Witnesses were erased. Graves were concealed. Even death was controlled. Genghis Khan vanished from the world the way he ruled it, violently, completely, without a trace of his resting place. But the empire did not end. It multiplied like a storm cell. His sons and generals inherited his methods, but they lacked even his dark mercy. The storm did not pass. It expanded, consuming the map. The world had survived the man. It had not survived the idea that the world is a forest and the Khan is the fire that cleanses it. The world was forever broken, reshaped in the image of the Iron Khan. The world did not recover. It adapted out of fear, a cold, paralyzing dread that seeped into the marrow of every living soul. After his death, the Mongol machine did not slow. It accelerated. It became a self-sustaining engine of annihilation. His sons did not inherit a kingdom. They inherited momentum, a violent, unstoppable force that demanded blood to keep its gears turning. Ogadai ruled next. Not as a visionary looking to build, but as an executor looking to finish what started. The armies split again, not randomly, but with a terrifying surgical purpose. China was not finished. The Jin dynasty still breathed behind its massive ancient walls, but that breath was stolen. Siege engines learned in the scorched lands of Persia were dragged east, across thousands of miles. Walls that had once mocked cavalry for centuries collapsed in weeks under the rain of fire and stone. Northern China died systematically, not by accident, but by design. Grain stores burned until the sky turned black. Populations vanished into the earth. Entire regions were emptied of life, turned into desolate pastures to feed the Mongol machine. The Song dynasty watched in frozen terror. They paid tribute. They delayed death. But they knew in their hearts they could not stop the storm. Then the West reopened. Russia stood fractured, a collection of petty feuds and weak princes who hated each other more than they feared the outsiders. The Mongols exploited that pride with lethal efficiency. One city at a time, one betrayal at a time. Ryazan burned, Vladimir burned, Suzdal burned. Kiev, the golden heart of Rus, was reduced to a smoldering ruin. Church bells rang in desperate prayer until the very towers collapsed. Priests were slaughtered at their own altars, and the Dnieper River ran red with the blood of the holy and the profane alike. Europe finally noticed. The laughter in the cathedrals stopped. Hungary mobilized. Poland prepared. Knights polished armor meant for another age, an age of chivalry that was about to be crushed by the reality of the steppe. 1241 AD. The Mongols arrived like a nightmare made flesh. At Legnica, the Polish forces charged, heavy cavalry, noble blood, faith in steel. They were met with blinding smoke and a feigned retreat that pulled their ranks apart like rotting fabric. Then came the encirclement. The army collapsed in a sea of arrows. The Duke of Silesia died on the field, and his head was displayed on a spear, a warning wrapped in cooling flesh. Days later in Hungary, the Battle of Mohi sealed the lesson. King Bela fled into the darkness. The Hungarian army was annihilated. The Great Plains became a vast graveyard under the moonlight. Europe stood open, terrified, waiting for the end of the world. Then, silence. The Mongols withdrew, not because they were defeated, but because Ogadei was dead. Succession mattered, even to monsters. The Great Khan's blood called them back to the center of the earth. Europe survived by timing, not strength. It was a miracle of coincidence. Back east, the empire reorganized, not as one throne, but as 4 pillars of terror. The Golden Horde ruled the west with an iron grip. The Ilkhanate ruled Persia with fire. The Chagatai Khanate ruled the heart of Central Asia. The Yuan dynasty rose in China. Different rulers, but the same brutal methods. Terror was standardized. Intelligence was prioritized over courage. Merit ruled promotion. Disobedience meant instant extinction. Trade reopened under a canopy of fear. The Silk Road became safe, not out of law, but because death followed thieves like a shadow. Cultures mixed unwillingly. Technologies spread like viruses. Gunpowder moved west to change the face of war forever. The plague followed later, traveling the same roads the Mongols had paved. The world shrank, connected by a bond of blood. But unity was a fragile lie. Rivals within the family rose. Civil wars erupted, not between empires, but between brothers. Power, in its purest form, devoured itself. The Yuan dynasty conquered all of China. Kublai Khan ruled from Beijing, adopting bureaucracy, paper money, and complex administration. But the Mongol soul weakened in the lap of luxury. Comfort replaced movement. Corruption replaced fear. Rebellions ignited in the dark. The red turbans rose. China pushed back with the fury of 1,000 years. The Yuan fell. The Mongols were forced back to the freezing north. The empire fractured further until the pieces no longer fit. In Persia, the Ilkhanate collapsed into the dust of history. Islam replaced steppe law, and the old terror was diluted by time and faith. The Golden Horde rotted slowly from within. Russian princes learned the art of patience. Tribute turned into resistance. Moscow rose quietly from the ashes of Kiev. The Mongol grip loosened, century by century, until the iron fingers finally let go. But the damage remained. It was permanent. Entire civilizations had been erased from the memory of man. Languages were silenced. Cities were never rebuilt, left as monuments to what happens when the steppe awakens. Population losses reshaped the very continents. Forests reclaimed farmland that had been tilled for millennia. Rivers changed course around ruins that no one remembered. The Mongols did not just conquer the world, they reset it. They proved something terrifying that the world can never unlearn. That speed beats size, that fear beats walls, that civilization is a fragile mask. No army after them could ignore mobility. No empire after them could ignore intelligence. No ruler after them could ignore terror as an instrument of policy. Genghis Khan did not live to see the full extent of the fire he started, but the shadow of his decisions stretched for 7 centuries. The world moved forward, stumbling into the modern age, but it never moved back to what it was. Because once fear learns to move with the speed of a Mongol horse, it is impossible to contain. It stays in the blood. It stays in the history. It stays forever. The world thought the storm would end when the man died. It didn't understand the storm was the system. Before the last campaigns, before the final silence, he did one thing no steppe ruler had ever done. He made chaos obey. 1206 AD, near the Onan River. The tribes gathered and Temujin became Genghis Khan. That moment was not a coronation. It was a reset button for the steppe. Old bloodlines were broken. Old loyalties were shredded. He reorganized people into new units that ignored tribe and family. So obedience went upward, not sideways. He built a chain of command that moved faster than arguments. And he enforced it with a law code so brutal and clear that even the brave learned to hesitate. Then he looked outward. Because a weapon doesn't stay on a shelf. 1211 AD. He struck the Jin dynasty in northern China, not to win a border. To prove a truth, walls don't stop fear if fear moves faster than walls can respond. Cavalry poured through passes, supply lines were cut, small garrisons vanished before larger armies could assemble. The Jin tried to fight like a settled empire. Genghis fought like weather, appearing, disappearing, returning from another angle. 1215 AD, Zhongdu, near modern Beijing. The Jin capital was taken. A city that believed itself permanent, learned permanence was a lie. Genghis didn't just capture territory, he captured knowledge. Engineers, siege experts, administrators. He took the brains that made cities possible. Stonebreaking became part of the Mongol toolkit. The steppe learned to crack civilization. But China was only the first classroom. The real lesson was waiting in the West. 1218 AD. Genghis Khan sent a trade mission into the Khwarazmian Empire, Central Asia's powerhouse, stretching across regions that lived on wealth, caravan routes, and confidence. He wanted commerce. He wanted access. He offered peace in exchange for profit. The Khwarazmians answered with murder. At Otrar, merchants were seized and killed. Then envoys, diplomats, sacred even in brutal worlds, were humiliated and executed. That wasn't an insult. That was an announcement. And Genghis Khan answered announcements with extinction. 1219 AD. He did not march west as one army. He split his forces like blades. One column struck Otrar. Others cut deeper toward Bukhara and Samarkand. Another force moved through routes defenders believed impossible. It wasn't just attack, it was collapse engineering. 1220 AD, Bukhara. The city fell. The message was louder than any speech. Wealth does not buy safety. Samarkand followed, one of the great jewels of Central Asia, broken under coordinated pressure, isolation, and shock. The Khwarazmian Shah fled. He ran across his own empire as it died behind him. He discovered the most terrifying part. There was nowhere far enough. 1220, 1221 AD. Urgent resisted hard and paid hard. Other cities made the wrong choice. Delay, defiance, hope. Hope became a death sentence. Genghis did not need to chase every defender personally. He had designed an army that hunted on its own. Subutai and Jebi, his sharpest commanders, rode like predators beyond the main front, striking where no enemy expected, breaking armies, and vanishing before revenge could form. 1221 AD. The Khwarazmian Empire collapsed as a system, not just militarily, administratively. Governors betrayed each other. Allies refused aid. Supply chains snapped. The Shah died a fugitive, isolated, powerless, watching the world he ruled evaporate. Genghis didn't just defeat an empire. He demonstrated the modern truth before modernity existed. If you destroy communication, coordination dies. If coordination dies, walls are just stone. Then the Mongol machine kept rolling, because momentum is addictive. Champhod 22, 1223 AD. Subutai and Jebi pushed into the Caucasus and beyond, testing the edges of Europe's awareness. In 1223 AD, at the Kalka River, in the lands of the Rus, The Mongols executed a lesson that would repeat for generations. They pulled enemies forward with retreat, stretched them thin with pursuit, then closed the trap. The Rus forces collapsed. The region didn't just lose a battle, it gained a nightmare it couldn't yet name. But Genghis Khan was not only a destroyer, he was also a builder of control. He protected merchants who served him. He punished banditry. He used relay stations and messengers to move orders across distances that would have killed earlier empires. He rewarded skill, no matter the birth of the man who carried it. And he made one promise true across a continent. If you submit, you live under rules. If you resist, you vanish under history's boot. Power, however, never stops demanding more. By the mid-1220s, Genghis Khan faced a problem that always appears after conquest. The edges of the empire keep moving, but the center must breathe. The steppe could fracture back into tribal chaos if he looked away too long. So he did what he always did. He applied pressure. 1226 AD. He turned against the Western Xia, Tangut Kingdom, in northwestern China, an old rival that had resisted Mongol demands and offered half loyalty when full submission was required. To Genghis, half loyalty was betrayal, wearing a polite face. He moved with punishment as policy. Cities were taken. Resistance was crushed. Not because he needed the land. He needed the example. Empires survive on the belief that the ruler's hand still reaches everywhere. Western Xia would learn that hand could still close. 1227 AD. During the campaign, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause remains uncertain. Illness, injury, or a chain of events no one was allowed to explain. The uncertainty is part of the design, because a ruler like this doesn't allow death to become weakness. His death was concealed. The army continued operations as if the storm still had a heartbeat. Orders still moved, cities still fell, enemies still surrendered, believing the conqueror was still watching. When his body was carried back, the path was turned into silence. Witnesses were eliminated. The route was wiped clean. The burial was hidden. No tomb to desecrate, no symbol to rally against, no closure for the world. He didn't want memory to soften into mythology. He wanted fear to remain practical. And it did. Because the most terrifying thing about Genghis Khan was not his personal violence, it was the structure he left behind. He had turned tribes into a disciplined machine. He had made loyalty a function of reward and terror, not blood. He had trained generals who could operate independently at extreme distances. He had normalized intelligence, deception, and speed as core doctrine. He had shown how to break empires by breaking their systems first. And his successors inherited the method. Ogidi expanded the machine. Campaigns continued into China, into Central Asia, into the Rus lands. The Mongol tide reached Eastern Europe in the 1240s and proved again what Genghis had already proven. If your politics are divided, you are already conquered. But even where the empire later fractured, into the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai realm, the Yuan dynasty, the blueprint remained. Mobility, discipline, merit, fear, information, shock. The world paid the price in reordered history. Trade routes reshaped, borders redrawn, cities erased from maps, states forced to adapt or disappear. Warfare changed permanently. Rulers learned that cavalry wasn't primitive when it was organized like a modern weapon. Administrations learned that speed can be more decisive than numbers. And every region touched by the Mongol system carried the scar. A new understanding that civilization is not guaranteed. It is tolerated until a stronger system arrives. Genghis Khan began as Temujin, the abandoned child on a merciless steppe. He became a name that could make cities surrender before the siege engines arrived. He died without a public grave, without a monument, without a goodbye. And that was the final conquest. Even death could not expose him, because he didn't leave behind a kingdom. He left behind momentum. And momentum does not care who created it. It only cares that the road is still open.